Hello, everyone. My name is Paula Nepps, and I'm the lead for the Center for Living Organ Donation. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a webinar focusing on kidney transplant nutrition. And we're very pleased to welcome two speakers who have a lot of expertise in this area. Our speakers today are Anna Richardson. Some of you may know Anna. She's a registered dietitian at Toronto General and has also worked in rehab, in oncology. She works primarily with transplant patients before and after their surgeries. And she also works with hemodialysis patients to help promote optimal health. She's very passionate about nutrition, and you'll be meeting her today and hearing more about her work and the work that she does with patients. We're also very pleased to welcome Linda Cerullo. Linda is a registered dietitian as well at UHN. And she has extensive experience working with kidney transplant patients. She has worked in the field for more than 15 years. She's recently transitioned to a new role, and we're very happy that she was able to come back and do this presentation. So as usual, our session will begin with a presentation, and then at the end, we'll open it up to Slido for questions. As you hear our presenters and you think of questions that you'd like addressed, please visit slido.com, and the code is kidney, slido.com, and submit your questions, and we'll come back to those at the end. So I'll turn it over to Linda to start us off.
Thank you very much, Paula. So next slide, I guess. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Linda Cerullo, and I'll be presenting the first few slides focusing upon the functions of the kidney and why nutrition is important when preparing for your kidney transplant. Anna will be discussing the remaining slides focusing on nutrition recommendations after receiving a transplant from both a short-term and long-term perspective. So let's begin today's presentation. Next slide. We thought that we should talk a little bit about what the main functions of the kidney are. We thought this could provide some insight of how the functions of the kidney allow and how there's a decline, when there is a decline in kidney function, what that actually means for nutrition and for our bodies. So today we'll be discussing the main functions of the kidney. We thought it'd be best to figure out the important role the kidney plays in our bodies and what happens when it no longer works properly. I thought I could focus on the functions of the kidney first to help give you some insight to why it is important, and then how nutrition helps during the various stages of kidney disease. As you can see here, the kidney is responsible for a number of tasks in our body, including the removal of waste products, fluid and blood pressure control, making red blood cells, regulating two very important hormones known as vitamin D and erythropoietin, and regulating blood mineral values. I'll discuss each of these roles in the next following slides. Next slide. Removing of waste products. So when we eat, food is broken down into our bodies into very small particles. The body then absorbs these nutrients that it needs and relies on the kidneys to remove any waste products. As kidney function begins to decline, there becomes a buildup of these waste products in the blood. This may cause an increase in certain blood values that many of you may be familiar with, such as creatinine and urea. As these values increase, there are symptoms associated with this known as uremic symptoms, which can be seen on the next slide. As you can see in this slide, with the buildup of urea in particular in your body, it affects a number of different systems in our body, such as the brain and nervous system. It can affect your heart, your muscles, body fluids, your blood, your digestion, your skin, and also sexual health. Symptoms that may be related to more of your digestion or your GI, which can affect your intake or your overall appetite, include taste changes, loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, constipation, or diarrhea. It can also cause fluid concerns such as leg swelling or edema, heart concerns such as high blood pressure and increased heart rate. It is also one of the leading causes of malnutrition and chronic kidney disease. Next slide. Malnutrition occurs when nutrients in the body are not absorbed as well as they were before, commonly in uremia, as there is an overall decrease in oral intake due to some of the symptoms that we just recently discussed: the loss of appetite, the taste changes, the many dietary restrictions, the fatigue, the changes in fluid requirements, vitamin and protein losses. As a result, protein and energy tend to break down a lot quicker than they did before, which overall depletes your overall stores and decreases your muscle mass. This becomes tricky on how much protein you should actually have, as different stages of kidney disease requires you to have different amounts of protein. Thus, obtaining guidance from your renal dietitian will help you decide that. I'll also be discussing protein in the following slides as well. Next slide. The other really important function of the kidney is fluid and blood pressure control. With a decline in kidney function, the body is not able to remove fluid properly, which may result in a decrease in urine output and an increase in swelling known as edema. So individuals may notice that their legs might be swelling or that they have less urine output. This is one of the reasons why. This is one of the things that tends to happen when kidney function begins to decline. This increase in fluid causes an increase in total blood volume. Basically, what that means is a lot more blood volume in your vessels, which can cause your blood pressure and your heart rate to rise. In order to help control fluid and blood pressure concerns, a low salt and fluid restriction diets may be recommended. For patients that are not on dialysis, fluid restrictions will be based upon the amount of edema present, so amount of swelling that is present. If a patient has no edema or no swelling and not on dialysis and no changes to urine output, then fluid is not usually restricted. For patients that are on dialysis, typically fluid restriction would be 1 liter plus urine output. I'll discuss the salt recommendations in further slides ahead. Next slide. Regulating hormones. As I mentioned, there are 2 main hormones that our kidney are responsible for, known as vitamin D and erythropoietin. Vitamin D helps keep our bones healthy. Vitamin D is vital in allowing our bodies to absorb minerals such as calcium and phosphorus in our bones. With a decrease in vitamin D, diseases such as osteoporosis may occur. The second hormone includes erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is the hormone that helps make red blood cells. The absence of this hormone can cause fatigue or making you feel extra tired. With this increase in fatigue, a lot of patients tend to tell me that they're sleeping all the time and not able to eat properly because they don't have the energy to kind of make their meals, which is one of the reasons why some patients may be on erythropoietin supplementation as well. Next slide. Regulating blood minerals. Other minerals that you may commonly hear are things like potassium, phosphorus, and sodium. With a decline in kidney function, there is an inability to absorb these nutrients properly. Depending on the stage of kidney disease, dietary restrictions for these nutrients are recommended. You'll hear more about these specific nutrients in the following slides that I have ahead. Next slide. So why is nutrition important when preparing for a kidney transplant? It's important to maintain nutrition throughout any stage of kidney disease, especially when preparing for a transplant. For example, keeping your protein and energy needs at the best possible levels will allow you to be ready for surgery and minimize complications. Another important factor is keeping blood sugar values and blood pressure under control to help with better outcomes post-transplant. Post-transplant medications, which Anna will discuss, may cause additional side effects, thus limiting these concerns before transplant would help. Keeping blood mineral values such as potassium and phosphorus within normal range will also help keep your blood vessels and heart muscles functioning at their best. Another important factor is weight. Keeping a healthy weight pre-transplant helps with recovery and prevents complications post. Healthy weight is for both individuals who are below and normal, who are above and below normal weight ranges. So, for example, an individual who may be underweight or above normal weight ranges. An indicator that we use is something called body mass index. For the general population, the ages and between the ages of 18 to 64, a normal range is anywhere between 18.5 to 25. Studies have shown that if you maintain this range, there is a decreased chance of complications. So from experience, I have seen patients who are overweight and have experienced many complications, such as longer hospital stays, wounds not closing properly, and development of post-transplant diabetes. On the flip side, I've also seen patients that are undernourished or underweight who also experience longer hospital stays, additional loss of muscle mass, and potential infections because they don't have enough protein stores. Therefore, being as healthy weight as possible, it becomes very crucial in terms of a proper recovery post-transplant. As renal dietitians, our goal is to keep you as healthy as possible for transplant. Thus, following kidney-friendly diets will allow you to do this. Next slide. Now I'll be discussing nutrition and chronic kidney disease. So following a kidney-friendly diet may help you protect your kidneys from further damage. Some of you may be familiar with what kidney-friendly diets are. We'll go through each of the different nutrients to see in more depth. This diet limits certain foods that prevents the minerals in those foods from building up in your body. This diet focuses on nutrients such as sodium, protein, calories, fluid, potassium, and phosphorus. And a renal dietitian will help you decide what diet is right for you. Next slide. So let's begin with sodium. During the early stages of chronic kidney disease, choosing foods with less salt or sodium will help control blood pressure and edema. It takes about 6 to 8 weeks to truly follow a low salt diet. Our recommendation is gradually cut salt out of your diet slowly to allow you to adhere to the diet better. We found with experience that if patients were to just cut out salt right off the bat, that within a couple of days, they're either craving salt or they're not able to adjust accordingly. Whereas if patients were able to slowly, gradually decrease the amount of salt, things that they may have liked previously and try them, I think that they're actually very, very salty this time around. So with this gradual process, it kind of allows you to adhere to this type of diet better. By controlling your blood pressure pre-transplant, you're able to have better results with your blood pressure post. Thus, following a low salt diet will help. Tips to help control salt include buying fruits and vegetables or fresh foods more often, making your own meals versus having prepared meals, using spices and herbs instead of salt, limiting prepackaged or processed foods, and looking at a nutrition facts table on packages. The next slide. So some of you may be familiar with this nutrition facts table that is on all packaged foods. As you can see in this slide, this table gives you the amount of sodium in a product. For this particular product, you would look at the serving size. So it says about a 1/4 cup, and you would look for the word sodium. And in this case, it's 120 milligrams. You could also look at something known as the percent daily value. Ideally, you would want the percent daily value or the actual amount of sodium to be less than 120 milligrams per serving or less than 5% for the daily value. This is considered a very low salt or sodium product. This will help in order to meet the recommendation to follow less than 2,300 milligrams per day, which is about equivalent to about a teaspoon of salt per day. So I don't know if for anybody who's been cooking at home and things like that, using a teaspoon of salt is quite easily done very quickly when you're adding it to different products. So 2,300 milligrams can add up very, very quickly. So keeping in mind to try and to find other products that you might be using at home, either packaged products that you may be using at home, to looking for the less than 120 milligrams of sodium, as well as trying to find things that have wording on their packages such as no salt added or low sodium or low salt would also be a good alternative to different types of products available. Next slide. Protein. With advanced kidney disease, eating more protein will make your kidneys work harder. Eating the right amount of protein will help protect your kidney function and help keep you strong when a transplant occurs. So we need to try to preserve whichever protein stores or muscle mass that you have in order to make surgery or the recovery phase for transplant the best possible. There are two main types of protein. There's animal proteins. So there's meat, chicken, fish, eggs, or dairy. And then there's plant-based proteins known as beans, nuts, or legumes. Depending on the stage of kidney disease, your protein needs will change. For example, if a patient that is in kidney failure but not on dialysis, they would be required to be on a lower protein diet, where a patient who is on dialysis needs a higher protein diet because these individuals lose more protein with each dialysis treatment. Therefore, it becomes important to determine your protein needs pre-transplant so that you're in the best shape for surgery and recovery post. Next slide. Another nutrient that follows the kidney-friendly diet, it focuses upon phosphorus. This may also be a common nutrient that some of you may be aware of. High phosphorus foods include things like whole grains and cereals, dairy products, legumes, beans, nuts, dark colas, and chocolate. As kidney function decreases, you may need to eat foods lower in phosphorus. This will help protect your bones and blood vessels. When the phosphorus level in your blood is too high, it makes calcium from the bones come into the blood vessels, thus resulting in blood vessels to act like bone, so very stiff and hard. We want to keep blood vessels flexible and fluid-like so that blood can pump through them very easily. By keeping phosphorus within normal range pre-transplant, you're able to keep your blood vessels nice and fluid-like or very flexible for after transplant as well. Next slide. Potassium. Potassium is probably another nutrient that you've heard of many, many times. You may be asked to decrease your potassium intake or the amount of potassium that you eat. Foods that are high in potassium include things like bananas, oranges, tomatoes, potatoes, whole grains, brown rice, pastas, beans, and nuts. As you can see, the potassium and the phosphorus diets actually tend to complement one another, which is kind of very good to allow for when you're following one diet. By following a low potassium diet, this will help your heart. Potassium actually helps your heart, your muscles, and your nerves to work properly. Too much potassium can cause heart palpitations or even worse, a heart attack. By keeping potassium within a normal range, you're able to keep your heart functioning at its best in order to prepare you for transplant or during any stages of the kidney disease. Next slide. So in summary for this section, as you can see, with advanced kidney disease, there are multiple dietary restrictions. Thus, it is important to follow these restrictions in order to keep you the best health for a transplant. It is also important to keep your blood sugars and blood pressure under control to help with better transplant outcomes. Maintaining a healthy weight pre-transplant has also been associated with better outcomes and less complications post. So it becomes important to work with your renal dietitian to assist you with all your nutritional needs. I will now like to pass it on to Anna to continue the rest of the presentation. Next slide.
Great. Thank you so much, Linda. My name is Anna, and I will be taking over for the second half of our session, which is nutrition after kidney transplant. So we're first going to talk about the short-term period, which is about 6 to 8 weeks after your kidney transplant, where our goal is recovery. This is to help promote healing. So it can be helpful to increase your intake of protein by 1 to 2 servings a day, either animal or plant proteins. So that can be meat, eggs, dairy, nuts, legumes, all these foods, just to kind of get yourself back up and feeling good. So the majority of people after their kidney transplant are able to reintroduce many of the foods that they were limiting. A lot of those nutrients that Linda was speaking of, since your new kidney will be able to manage your fluid and electrolyte levels. So that's adding back those foods that are high in potassium and phosphorus, and increasing your fluid intake to keep your new kidney well hydrated. Next slide. So after this initial recovery phase, we do have some long-term goals, which are to keep yourself and keep your new kidney healthy. So that means managing any potential side effects of transplant medications and maintaining good function in your new kidney. Next slide. So people may experience weight gain after their kidney transplant. And this is due to one of the transplant medications called prednisone, which can increase appetite. Some people may also develop diabetes, as prednisone may also contribute to elevated blood sugars. There are other conditions, including high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and cardiovascular disease that become more common due to this increased appetite and this weight gain, as well as just having less dietary restrictions. However, these side effects do not happen to everyone, and it really does vary a bit on the individual. Next slide. Okay, so how do we keep that new kidney as healthy as possible? One of the major recommendations is limiting sodium intake, which is the same recommendation as in chronic kidney disease that Linda has already mentioned. Again, this is that 2,300 milligrams per day or 1 teaspoon. But it is important to note that most of the salt we consume doesn't always come from the salt shaker. It's from packaged and processed foods, deli meats, sauces, soups, snack foods. This is where quite a lot of the sodium comes from. So it's really important to keep being mindful of those food labels. And if you're cooking at home with whole ingredients, that's really the best way to really know how much sodium you're having. Next slide. All right, so one of our other main recommendations for keeping that new kidney healthy is to eat a diet that's moderate in protein. As Linda mentioned, kidneys are responsible for removing the waste of protein breakdown in our bodies. So if you were eating a very high protein diet, that may promote damage to the new kidney over time. So following the plate model is a really great way to help guide your protein intake, and that's on our next slide. So here's the relatively new Canada's Food Guide, and you can see that plate is divided into three types of food. We have our vegetables and fruits, which is the largest part of the plate, and then we have whole grain foods, which also includes other complex carbohydrates. And then we have a quarter of our plate as protein foods. So that's a kind of a good guide for helping to moderate your protein intake. It is also recommended to limit those foods that are high in saturated fat, such as baked goods, snack foods, high fat dairy, fatty cuts of meat, as well as foods that are quite high in added sugar, desserts and things. It's also recommended to choose water more often as your drink of choice. So a lot of what is on this plate is high fiber foods. So eating a diet that's high in fiber is really beneficial for managing blood sugar and reducing cholesterol levels. So all of those whole grains, those beans and lentils, vegetables and fruits are really, really high in fiber. And a lot of Canadians don't get enough fiber. It can be difficult. But following this type of balanced diet overall will help decrease the risk of diabetes, of high blood pressure, and high cholesterol, as well as helping you to maintain a healthy weight. Next slide. So apart from the plate model, we have another diet that has been quite well studied in kidney transplant recipients. And they found that people that after a kidney transplant, if they're following a Mediterranean style diet, they'll have better kidney function. So here we have our pyramid, and you can see the base foods here are the whole grains, the beans, vegetables, and fruits, as well as nuts, olive oil, herbs, and spices. And then we have fish and seafood regularly. And at the top, we have red meat, poultry, eggs, dairy, and sweets to kind of have in moderation. You'll also notice that wine is kind of on the side of this pyramid. And we do recommend to avoid alcohol for the first 8 weeks or so after transplant. And then having in moderation is usually fine after that, but it is important to discuss with your physician. And you'll see at the base of this pyramid is physical activity. And of course, that is also an excellent way of helping to promote good health. But directly after transplant, there would be some limitations on activity. So again, it's good to speak with your transplant team about that. Next slide. Alrighty, so another thing that's really important after any type of organ transplant is food safety. So because you're taking these immunosuppressive medications, the risk of contacting foodborne illness or food poisoning is higher. So it is really important to ensure that meat and fish and eggs are fully cooked to limit this risk, as well as making sure that foods are prepared and stored appropriately. This means keeping things at correct temperature, avoiding cross-contamination between cooking surfaces and utensils. We just really want to keep this risk as low as possible to avoid any illness. And you can always ask your transplant team for more information about this. Next slide. So our last recommendation is just regarding natural health products. So this can be things like echinacea or turmeric capsules or homeopathic remedies. And it's just that they have the potential to interact with some of your transplant medications. And really, there just isn't enough research in these products to determine whether they are safe for people that have had transplants. And the same also goes for vitamin and mineral supplements that haven't been recommended by your physician. So it's just good to, keep an open dialogue with your physician about, what kind of things you're taking. And of course, if you are curious about specific products, you can definitely get in touch with your physician or your pharmacist about that. All right, next slide. So to recap our review of nutrition after kidney transplant, it really is about focusing on a balanced diet to help keep your new kidney healthy and to reduce your risk of chronic disease. This means lots of vegetables and fruits, legumes, whole grains, and a moderate amount of lean protein. And again, important that salt, that saturated fat, and added sugar, and being mindful of a couple other things, the food safety and the natural supplements. Next slide. So just to wrap up for us, it's quite evident that nutrition does play a key role in all stages of kidney disease and before and after transplant. And as Linda and I have seen it, kidney transplant really is just this amazing opportunity to regain flexibility and variety in your diet and your lifestyle and your overall health. And I think we're very grateful to all of the donors who we've seen, they've made such an incredible difference in so many lives. So thank you so much for listening to us today. And I'm going to pass that over to Paula.
Thank you very much, Linda and Anna. This was a great overview of the requirements for kidney patients pre and post transplant, and the advice that you're providing. I think that we've received quite a lot of questions from our registrants for this webinar, and some of this content you've covered in your presentation, but I'm wondering if we could potentially review those questions and get a summary of some of those recommendations. So, Anna, you focused on
Yeah.
post-transplant. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the first question: Is protein restricted? Is a protein restricted diet still recommended for renal transplant patients?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to add one other thing. And there's so many different stages of kidney transplant, and then there's the pre, and then there's the post, and then there's people are maybe also managing other conditions. So it really is like a no one size does not no one size fit all. It is very individual. So there's some recommendations that might work very well for some people that just may not apply to others. But so in terms of this question, is a protein restricted diet still recommended for renal transplant recipients? So as I mentioned, it's a moderate protein intake. So I think there are some stages of kidney disease before dialysis where you might be restricting it more so than after your kidney transplant. And it really is that moderate. It is actually the same recommendation of protein as the general public. But actually, most people in Canada get more than enough protein. So it being the same recommendation, but it is, there can be a risk of having too much. But thankfully, it's not a very strict, I think it's a bit easier to follow than some of the pre-transplant restrictions, if that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. And Linda, can you remind us again what the restrictions are pre-transplant? How much protein is too much? Realize that that's not an easy question or an easy
fine.
question to answer.
No, that's fine. What tends to happen is, as Anna was mentioning, it does depend on the stages of kidney disease. So patients that are typically in stages 1, 2, and 3, so GFR is still greater than 30 mils. Their protein restrictions would still remain around the moderate in terms of 0.8 grams per kilogram, for example. In terms of patients where you're going into the more stage 4, stage 5, you can still stick around the 0.8 grams per kilogram. I've seen it go as low as 0.6. Those are considered in order to help preserve the kidney function as much as possible. With that said, we also tend to restrict protein based on the levels of the urea that I was talking about in my slides. Some patients can have a high urea and not have that many symptoms. That can also occur. And if that's the case, then we tend to keep protein within the moderate type of restriction. However, if urea tends to go too high and patients are developing those symptoms, then the further that we cut down the protein, the easier it will be on the patient in terms of trying to not have the symptoms at urea. So because what tends to happen is as the body breaks down the protein, urea becomes one of those byproducts that tends to increase in the blood and you get those symptoms. So pre-transplant, you will have that moderate to a lower protein to 0.6 grams per kilogram. With that said, patients who are in stage 5 kidney disease or requiring dialysis, they actually need more protein. So because the treatment actually takes away a lot of the protein in the machine itself. So if a dialysis patient's on dialysis 3 times a week, probably about 60 to 70% of the protein stores are taking away 3 times a week. So that's one of the reasons why they're at a much higher, so like a 1.2 grams per kilogram for those patients as well.
Mm-hmm. I think these recommendations can probably be quite confusing for many patients and also for family and friends who may not be aware of the impact. Are there resources? Is there information that you generally recommend to patients and family members so that they can access this information quickly and it's very clear for them?
So we tend to, one of the main networks that we tend to relate to is something called the Ontario Renal Network, where you'll find a lot of our nutrition-based handouts are coming from that type of an organization. There's also the Kidney Foundation, or kidney.ca, which we also tend to tap into in order to getting a lot of the information that's provided to patients and families. Our clinical guidelines are based on something called the Kudoki guidelines. So they're the kidney disease quality initiatives that are used worldwide in order to base what are kind of nitty gritty type of how much protein you actually need at different stages, what recommendations are. But for the general public, I would probably refer to the Kidney Foundation or the Ontario Renal Network.
Thank you very much for that. And I think we might have included some of those links in the description box on our YouTube channel. And we'll also be sharing some of those resources via our social media. Our next question is around intermittent fasting, which is something that has become quite popular and many people have questions about. And maybe we can go back to Anna. What are your thoughts about intermittent fasting? Do you think it's safe?
Yeah, I think this is definitely a diet that's, it's gotten a lot of interest in the last few years. I'm actually going to pass this one back to Linda, who has looked into this and I believe has some good insights about this in kidney patients.
Yeah. So as Anna was mentioning, intermittent fasting is becoming the new crave diet that I'm noticing that a lot of patients are on, depending, it doesn't matter which kind of patient population you're talking about, or even within the general public. I think when I was first studying nutrition, it was the whole thing about Atkins, but now we've moved to this intermittent fasting type of diet, I guess. With that said, there has been studies, particularly in polycystic kidney disease, where they show that intermittent fasting is as of some benefit. So there was a controlled study that showed patients that followed an intermittent fasting, as long as they maintained hydration. So we didn't dehydrate the kidney. So what ended up happening is that their patients' overall oral intake and protein intake for a week period actually decreased. So in general, patients were eating less protein. And what tended to happen was, and also perhaps these patients in particular were a bit overweight, so they may have lost some weight as well, which would help with factors such as blood sugar control and blood pressure. And on top of that, also decreasing in protein intake, which also would help with the kidney function in general. So as a whole, for patients, for transplant patients, or even patients who have some sort of kidney disease, there isn't very specific guidelines for transplant patients because there hasn't been studies specifically for transplant patients. However, with that said, intermittent fasting does allow for an overall decreasing the amount of calories and protein. So in the end, will help preserve some kidney function.
Thank you. Thank you for that. This question, I guess, has a number of subcomponents, and one of them is around daily multivitamins. Now, that was covered a little bit, but I'm wondering if you might be able to remind us what the recommendations are.
So we typically don't recommend a multivitamin post-transplant, mainly because of the fact we're hoping that you would obtain, now that you have the ability to have less dietary restrictions and you're able to have things like the whole grains and the nuts and seeds and legumes and a whole bunch of different foods and fruits and vegetables that you were not allowed to have before, that you're able to get those nutrients from food as opposed to taking a multivitamin. In addition to that, sometimes what tends to happen is patients who have chronic kidney disease develop something called hyperparathyroidism. So their parathyroid hormone regulates something called calcium and phosphorus within their body as well, and also vitamin D levels. In short, basically, multivitamins tend to have calcium added to them. And what tends to happen, sometimes the hyperparathyroidism can be carried through post-transplant. So some patients will still experience that high calcium are very low phosphorus after transplant. And that could just be a result of things that underlying kidney disease. And with a daily multivitamin, I think the fear becomes that you'll be having too much of an excess of calcium levels, for example. So we encouraged and to follow either the plate model or the Mediterranean diet, for example, in order for you to get most of your nutrients, as opposed to taking a multivitamin.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. All right, on to our next question, which is, what should I consider cutting out of my diet if I want to become a donor? And we know that living donors are very, very healthy people, but we always want to ensure that they are the healthiest possible before their surgery. So who would like to take this one?
I think I'll take that one as well. Sorry, not to add too many, but just with some experience, we typically don't see donors pre or post transplant. I have had the one-off that we're seeing in my years of experience might have come up for certain questions and things like that. We're typically, as you mentioned, Paula, the donors tend to be very healthy, so following very healthy diets, don't have underlying conditions and things like that. So that's one of the things we consider for donors to do, is to continue that kind of healthy eating process or maintaining a healthy lifestyle post-transplant as well. The donors typically tend to be followed by a nephrologist post-transplant, just to make sure that their kidney function still remains the same, and it typically does. There is usually very little concern to the donor themselves, and patients live with one kidney their entire life. So they're able to continue to follow a healthy diet, or following things like the healthy plate model that was discussed will actually help keep your single kidney now as healthy as possible. So making sure that things like hydration is there, drinking lots of fluids, following the healthy diet are going to be the two key things to making sure that you stay as healthy as possible.
Right. And then post-surgery, maintaining a healthy weight, and also, managing blood pressure as well, I guess, would be important. And the diet also plays a role there.
Ideally, yes. So post-surgery, we would look at things like protein for the donors as well, because anybody who's had surgery, any surgery, patients are considered at higher protein needs. So for the first 6 to 8 weeks, we'd actually ask donors to increase their protein intake just to help with wound healing, fight infections, and any lean body, so any muscle mass they may have not lost in hospital. So they would actually be at a higher protein needs, and then they would go back down to the general population's recommendations, which is a moderate protein diet. So we ask them to avoid high protein diets, just like we would with any in the general population as well. And again, like you mentioned, Paula, maintaining a healthy weight as well. And blood pressure should hopefully not be a concern, but if it does, then a salt restriction would be considered.
Fantastic. All right, our next question is around restrictions for multigrain or whole wheat, or things like bread or pasta. I'm wondering, Anna, is this something you want to address? I think we've covered some of this in the presentation, but it may be helpful just to review that again. What are the recommendations?
Yeah, for sure. And I would say that in general, after a transplant, you definitely don't need to be restricting these types of foods, the whole wheats, whole grain rice and whole grain pasta, all these types of things. They're incredibly nutritious. They're going to have that fiber in them. They're going to have extra vitamins and minerals. So for decreasing your risk of diabetes and high cholesterol and things, these are actually quite beneficial. So there might be some instances where if somebody they're getting their blood work done often, and potentially they would, if they did have a bit of a high potassium or phosphorus, it might be needed to kind of look at that diet again and see if there are some foods that need to be limited. But in general, no, they're all great products, and it's so nice to have all these things added back in after a transplant. I always love to talk to patients after their transplant and just tell them how much more variety they can have, and it's always very well received.
Absolutely. Our next question deals with water and liquids. Who wants to take this one? How much water, liquids should a kidney patient consume per day, pre and post transplant?
Yeah, I can take this question as well. So, of course, like we've said with everything, it will vary by person. It would vary by stage of kidney disease as well. There are people that have earlier kidney disease stages that don't really need to be limiting these things because they're still making a lot of urine, right? It's if we're able to, have fluids come in and have fluids go out of the body, then there's less likely that you would need any sort of restriction on your fluid, or if you're not having any of that swelling or edema. But if when the kidney disease comes to a point where people are not really making much urine, they're having swelling, then some people do have to follow quite a strict, like a 1 liter fluid restriction per day. But after transplant, the initial recommendation is to have 2 liters or more sometimes, just to keep yourself hydrated, keep that new kidney well hydrated and functioning really well. So that definitely is a big difference from pre-transplant to post-transplant is the fluid difference. So it's nice after transplant to have that more liberalized fluid intake as well, which is definitely a lot easier.
I see we have a question about alcohol, and since we're talking about water and liquids and fluids, etc., perhaps we should address the alcohol question. There are low-risk drinking guidelines for healthy adults. I'm wondering, what advice do we provide around alcohol pre and post-transplant, and how much alcohol is too much?
Linda, did you want to
Want me to touch upon? Sure, I'll take upon this one. I think what we tend to recommend for alcohol intake is the first 6 to 8 weeks. We actually tell patients not to have alcohol, just because of the fact that your body's getting used post-transplant. Sorry, first 6 to 8 weeks post-transplant, we tell patients not to have alcohol because the body's getting used to not getting used to the different medications and having a surgery, and we kind of don't want to add an additional factor to that. After the 8 weeks, we would do what the general healthy guidelines are: 1 to 2 drinks per day for men and women, basically. I tend to be on the, lower, the safer end in terms of the amount of alcohol that people can have. Typically, when I speak to patients, which is quite interesting, when I do bring up alcohol, they're like, "Oh no, it's just once in a while if I'm out for a social gathering or something like that." That's what I tend to hear from most patients. But that's the general recommendation, what we'd recommend to the general population after this 8-week mark of the post-transplant.
Yeah, and I would just add that if alcohol comes with its risks, it can also in turn, increase high blood pressure. It can contribute to high cholesterol and cardiovascular disease. So, if you are looking at that whole picture of health and picture of protecting your new kidney, definitely we want to, have it in moderation. Absolutely, as Linda said.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Linda, you mentioned 1 to 2 drinks, and how do you define drinks?
It would be similar to, I guess, what the Health Canada recommends. So, for example, it would be 4 ounces of wine, I believe, and heart of liqueurs would be like 1 or 2 ounces. Probably, don't quote me exactly right now, but that's what I'm remembering off the top of my head. But those are typically what we normally recommend.
Right.
And I don't know if you want to add anything.
And I believe it is for like beer and cider, it would be 12 ounces.
12 ounces, yeah. Sorry, thank you.
As well.
Yeah.
So yeah, sometimes you'd get if you went to a restaurant and ordered a glass of wine or ordered a pint, these are going to actually be more than a serving. Even if you just had 1 drink, it ends up being like 1.5 servings of alcohol. So just good to keep in mind.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we have one last question. This question is quite high level, so maybe it provides an opportunity for us to summarize the guidance that we provide to families and patients on the wait list, and then post-transplant, and then what are the key differences. So maybe I can get both of you.
Yeah, Linda, I don't know if you wanted to start us off here.
Sorry, I was muted. So for guidance to provide families on the transplant waitlist, I guess in terms of, I guess we can start with patients. It would depend on what stage of kidney disease that the patient is at, and in order to help continue to follow a kidney-friendly diet in order to keep you as healthy as possible healthy as possible in order to gear you up for a transplant. So I guess it's what I was talking about before, maintaining things like blood pressure control and blood sugars and healthy weights in order to make your overall health status in order to get to the surgery as healthy as possible. That's one of the things I'd probably say to to families and patients that are on the wait list. The wait list is also something that depends upon the multiple factors. So it's not something that, and it could be a longer wait list depending on different blood types and different levels of stages of kidney disease, and being on dialysis and not on dialysis is also a couple of the factors that it may also contribute to. However, so that's one of the reasons why if we can try to speak with your renal dietitian in terms of optimizing that, your nutritional status would be probably one of the best keys for it. Anna, did you want to add anything before I move on to the next one?
I don't think so.
Okay. And then post-transplant, in terms of, I guess Anna will talk about in terms of maintaining a healthy weight, like she mentioned, in terms of following things like the plate model and making sure that blood sugars and blood pressure is under control in order to help preserve whatever kidney function that you do have and keeping that kidney as healthy as possible. And then Anna, I'll let you touch on that.
Sure, yeah. So I know it's definitely can be a concern for people when they're learning about a transplant that the risks of gaining weight can be higher. But I think it really is about, setting some very small goals for yourself over time. I know it's very overwhelming to just make completely overhaul your diet all at once. And it's just, I'm going to cook one extra meal at home today instead of going out. I'm going to add one extra vegetable to my meal. I'm going to try a new recipe that has lentils in it. It's, it's all these little day-to-day things that are going to make a difference. And it's really looking at that plate. And if you look at that plate model, it's quite a lot of vegetables on it. And these are, generally like they're low calorie foods that have a lot of volume, so they can help you kind of, get more full. So just having that variety, I think, is really, really important. And, trying to get your family involved and looking up recipes and trying to, look at, what meals do we want to have for dinner this week, and engaging with your whole transplant team about all of these things, because it is, it's this day-to-day thing that you're trying to upkeep your health and your kidney function for a long time. So, take it slow, and then I think you got to, reach out when you need.
Thank you. That's very good advice. So thank you very much, Anna and Linda, for your great presentations, for taking the time to answer the questions submitted in advance. If anyone in the audience has additional questions, please send an email to livingorgandonation@uhn.ca, and we'd be happy to answer. We also have some great events coming up, including Living Donation Week, which this year is from September 12th to the 18th. You can register for the free events that will occur during that week at livingdonationweek.ca. We'll also be organizing further events in October, so check out our Eventbrite page as well. So thank you very much, Anna and Linda, for your very comprehensive presentations. Thank you to our audience for being so understanding with our technical issues today. And thank you to everyone who was able to put this together, including Courtney Mart, who made it all look beautiful and kept her cool today. So